Hello there, my name is Professor Nadine Naber, and I'm incredibly grateful to Dr. Suzanne Nasser and Moraine Valley for inviting me and featuring my book, Arab America, Gender, Cultural Politics, and Activism. In many ways, my book draws upon and expands Edward Said's theory of Orientalism, where he helped us understand how European thought created the categories East versus West, or even how many people in the world think about the idea of the Middle East, and how European thought defined the East as backwards and uncivilized versus the West as civilized, and how these categories are at the root of anti-Arab racism and the colonization of Arab lands. In my work, I have been studying how Orientalist thought gets remade in the United States, whether it's through racist ideas that Arab and Muslim queer people are oppressed by this super homophobic Arab or Muslim culture, or how images of hyper-oppressed Arab or Muslim women who need to be saved by good American heroes just sort of circulate US society. But not only that, in my work, I've looked at how these ideas are internalized and shape the lives of Arab American communities. So rather than just focusing on how Arab Americans are affected by racism and Orientalism, I look at how Arab American communities can reinforce or participate in self-Orientalism or internalized racism. So how do I do that? Well, the book is based on 10 years of ethnographic research among Arab American youth in the Bay Area of California, especially those involved in leftist, anti-war, and Palestinian liberation activism, and those involved in global social justice movements framed around global Muslim social justice. So the book then is a study of based on community-based research and what I call social movement-led research, where I was part of the movements that I was writing about, and the book was led by the interests and needs of these movements. That is a leftist anti-war Palestinian liberation activist movement and a global Muslim social justice movement. So in my book, I analyze how Arab American community attempts to hold on to our cultural histories and resist racism and Zionism can have the unintentional effect of reinforcing rigid, idealized concepts of gender and sexuality that aren't that different from the Orientalist ideas about gender and sexuality. And so this, dynamic of reinforcing, colonialist categories of Arab womanhood or Arab sexuality within our communities often plays out through the set of ideals that Arab immigrant communities often uplift around how we define what it means to be Arab versus what it means to be American. So this is kind of the crux of the book, is where I look at how Arab immigrant communities have crafted their concepts of what it means to be Arab and what it means to be American through colonialist and Orientalist logics or forms of thought. So an example of that would be how in some cases when Arab immigrant communities, strive to define what family means to their children, they might say, Arab girls are good girls, who don't stay out late at night versus American girls who are, promiscuous or even, trashy or, sleep around or whatever, sort of binary opposing concepts of Arab versus American are that Arab immigrant communities often enforce, but primarily as a strategy to hold on to their cultural identity, survive the struggle of being Arab in America. And that's what I mean by unintentionally reinforce these Orientalist opposite categories, Arab versus America. And so while many scholars have addressed this split, so for example, many of us know that a lot of Arab American youth see themselves as living a double life between their Arab side or their American side, or Arab culture versus American culture. But I show how these concepts aren't necessarily a cultural struggle, or we can't understand them through these ideas of culture, like Arab culture versus American culture, although that's how we often see them. More specifically, I show in my book that these ideas of what it means to be Arab and what it means to be American are actually shaped by politics and history and the struggle of Arab immigrants to survive displacement, racism, and war. And so, in short, my book seeks to basically break the silence, because sometimes in Arab immigrant communities, people fear talking about issues of sexism and homophobia, because sometimes if we frame it in cultural terms, we might fear that if I say, I'm experiencing sexism or homophobia, then that just might reinforce Orientalist ideas about our communities. And